So yeah, I just want to say big thanks to DBT and Coalesce. I think this has been a great event so far. I've been losing my voice because I've been having so much fun. So I'm okay. I talk for a living. I'm a manager. But it may sound like my voice hurts, but I'm okay. So bear with me. So I'm going to jump right in, but at a high level, we needed data in Salesforce for some of our teams, but we have massive data volume at Spotify, as you can imagine. Is anybody here not a Spotify user? All right, see, so that means everybody else's data is my problem. And so we needed to put pieces of this huge amount of data into Salesforce without choking Salesforce. And Salesforce is not a powerhouse of data aggregation, to say the least. As we were approaching this, we basically took it a run at it. We almost failed, but we're able to put something together in the end, which is, I'll talk about this a few times, but it's what we're calling, composable data solution, and that's why I wanted to share that today. It's something that hopefully other people in this room can recycle and use and save some of the pain points that we had to look through. So this is the story of how we delivered clean, reliable insights directly into Salesforce, which broke down data silos. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And in the end, it just a massively empowered decision-making across Spotify and across teams by bringing data from one place into another place it didn't want to go and make it all look like it should have been working that way the whole time. All right, let me get the clicker. I love these. I'm so used to doing presentations on Zoom now in front of the keyboard. I don't get to do like clicker and stand-up, so this is a treat. So I'm Tim Leonard. I'm a senior insight manager at Spotify. My team focuses on reporting content consumption. I've got a group of AEs and data scientists, so analytics engineers, data scientists, and an engineer on my team. So I'm very lucky to have sort of the full stack of analytics in one place, which lets us do a lot of really cool stuff.
And I'm Clayton Van Hovel. I'm a senior analytics engineer at Hightouch, and so I use Hightouch a lot internally and have been kind of working around the Spotify use case a little bit as well.
All right, so let's get into it. We'll break down this into 3 sections, but essentially why we needed better data in Salesforce, what our composable data platform solution was, and then summarize with the results we achieved. So let's get started. Why do we need better data in Salesforce in the first place? Let me try and sketch out the use case here because I think that's really quite critical. Our creative partnership teams rely on Salesforce to track partnerships with creatives. That's kind of what Salesforce is good at, and they use it for that. But they came to us basically saying, we need fingertip access to the whole wide scope of metrics that's available to us outside of Salesforce, but we need it in Salesforce. Obviously, what do you say back? You say, why can't you just open the dashboards that we already gave you? But they made the case that we have to go fast, we have to talk to a lot of people, we need everything to be in one place as we're having the conversations. And so you can imagine create one of these partnership team members has to talk to 3 different creatives in one morning. So already the morning's busy. They don't have time to prep anything. Creative 1 asks, how many monthly users are on my show? They don't have time to go in and get dashboard B and filter it XYZ. They just said, can't you just put that all in front of me and put all of that for me on Salesforce? I was like, that's kind of a compelling use case. Maybe we can do that. How hard could this be? I had not used Salesforce at this point in time, so how hard could this be? But inevitably, we faced data integration challenges, and I'll speak to those a little bit more in detail. So obviously, the data volume is just way too big. We initially naively thought, well, we'll put in some semi-aggregated stuff and let Salesforce do the cuts and treat it like a BI tool. It just didn't work at all. our creative partnership teams, they rely on Salesforce, but all like the good, detailed, granular data lives in BigQuery, and all the reporting tools stem up from that, essentially our data lake. So how do we then take everything from the data lake, refine it, put it into Salesforce, and be smart about it, all without overloading Salesforce, so really specializing towards the delivery. Now, the data that the partnership team was putting into Salesforce was not going back into BigQuery. So there's all of this domain expertise, subject matter expertise that's getting put into Salesforce, all of this information that then there's no way to get it back out. So we had to solve for that as well. And then in the original iterations of this, we worked with some, I just call it like old school Salesforce contractors. And essentially, they just built the whole thing deep inside the guts of Salesforce. And nothing about it worked properly, and we couldn't figure out how any of it worked. And that was where solution number one got torn down, and we said we got to figure out a better way if this is actually going to work, because ultimately I have to maintain this thing. So it's important that it's maintainable. So let's talk a little bit about the solution, and I'll pass it over.
Yeah, so I think we can start with an overview of just kind of what the Spotify tech stack looks like, which is the Salesforce data, obviously, and then they're dumping that into BigQuery and then doing transformation with dbt, and then Hightouch is ultimately how it goes back over. But dbt is like really what defines the data in BigQuery, because we take the source data, or Spotify takes the source data into BigQuery and then transforms it, and then has a lot of these pre-calculations that we probably couldn't do in Salesforce, and then gets the transform data there as well. Kind of same thing there. And then Hightouch is the kind of end of this pipeline that is dumping the transform data that's like, utilize a lot of compute that we have in BigQuery that's probably not available in Salesforce and would slow down Salesforce, and dumps it into there. And then the last portion, which I'll let Tim talk more about, is kind of this cyclical nature of how that Salesforce data that was pumped in by Hightouch is actually being brought back into BigQuery and accessed by other teams.
So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more on the dbt role, right? Because we have to talk about dbt to get the talk in to the conference. But I am a massive dbt fan, so I don't mind. So dbt isn't just a transformation tool for us, and it's really tempting to think of like, yeah, dbt, TL, take the big data, make it small data, that's great. But truly, like, dbt is the glue that holds this whole system together. The metaphor that I often find myself using for dbt is not just as a transformation factory, but also as like a railroad switch. It's acting in the middle, helping to make the right decisions, to get the right upstreams and put it in the right downstreams based on a number of different conditions. We really leverage the macros to do a lot of smart models, so we'll have multiple workflows referencing the same model, doing different things based on conditionals that are provided by those workflows. And in that way, we can use dbt to send data down the different channels of the DAG as we need, which ends up really being quite powerful in this implementation. And I'll talk a little bit more about those routes in a second. So when I'm talking about the multiple workflows, really the goal there is flexibility so that we can first stage the data. That's where Hightouch can pick it up and send it to Salesforce. Do these cyclical updates, so conditionally do X or Y based on the state of A or B upstream. And then also classic dbt, transform the data, so pre-aggregate it, do the stuff that dbt is really good at, make it a little bit smaller so we can send it to Salesforce. All right, getting a little bit, there we go, nice DAG now, right, what everybody's been waiting for. So here's a simplified visual representation that we've been talking about. Here, DBT is doing double duty. Like I've been saying, it's our transformation engine, but it's also the thing helping us with our routing logic. So it starts with replication. First, I don't know, Salesforce replication box. Everybody look at the Salesforce cloud and follow the arrow down. That's where we are. So it starts with the replication. We just do a snapshot of Salesforce, dump it into BigQuery. Great. Now we need to divide the data. Some of it goes out into the reporting layer. But we also then use that Salesforce data to do pre-aggregation. So we're taking our big amount of BigQuery data, enriching it with what we take out of Salesforce, joining it with metadata, putting that into the Hightouch staging. That then goes into Salesforce. CSRs will then do more on the records with the information that we've put in. That then gets replicated. That newly enriched data is then pushed back out to reporting, more pre-aggregations, more metadata, and it just goes on and on and on and on. I think what's interesting about this is like where does the cycle actually start? Maybe that helps kind of illustrate what we're doing here. And that's essentially what's all the creative in Salesforce that we care about. We replicate it, we figure out all the metadata we need, we push that back into Salesforce, and then from there, the CSRs are augmenting the data in Salesforce, and we pull that out and do what we need with it.
Yeah, so I can hop in here and talk about why Hightouch was kind of a good pick for this solution. And the biggest thing and the first thing was the scalability. They had a lot of data that they were putting into Salesforce, and before there was kind of like a all at once, everything, even things that were not necessarily new, were being dumped into Salesforce, and it was just not working originally. And so one thing that Hightouch is able to do is check what data has been changed and only send that data over to Salesforce, which reduced some of the operational burden that was happening in Salesforce. The next portion was the security and the governance and permissions specifically. Not all users had to have access to all of the things in Hightouch and just what was relative to their team. And the credentials, Hightouch has a great integration with Google Cloud, which allowed for the credentials that Spotify was using to be seamlessly accessed in a secure fashion, as well as the data isolation layer, which allowed that kind of isolate their GCP project into its own area just for this specific use case, so it didn't have to touch the entire data lake. And lastly is the efficiency of the Hightouch UI, where basically you kind of just set these source to target mappings from the data warehouse into Salesforce and leave it and have some good observability on the pipeline along the way if things break, but for the most part, just set it and forget it.
All right, so final part of the talk, results. For us, the composable architecture has been really quite a big win across the board for us. We saw massive process improvements, which is at the lowest level, way less manual work. Before this, we'd have analysts pulling reports from Salesforce, doing all of that, manually combining that with a pull from BigQuery in Google Sheets, doing the lookups. It was pretty inefficient. There was also a situation where they were looking at getting more Salesforce seats just to be able to run reports, which is also a little bit inefficient. So now we have the cycle working, we have the data going into Salesforce, we have the data coming back out, and we can build these really nice data representations for all the teams that need them natively off of BigQuery using the latest and greatest out of Salesforce. And then, related is the cost savings is we don't have to have a license for everybody just to pull a report. They can just work in Tableau, Google Sheets, BigQuery, and get exactly what they need without being locked into Salesforce. On the data quality side, it's nothing but wins for us. Hightouch is fantastic because they just own all of the upserts. It comes, with the monitoring, the automation. We just don't really have to think about it. It's one of my favorite when you pay for something to save you time. That's the best thing to pay for. So we don't have to have an engineer around to debug that piece of the Salesforce puzzle, and that's been like huge value for us. And then integrating DBT as the middle part of that cycle, we then get all the classic DBT stuff for free with testing and validation as well. So we have a ton of confidence about what we're putting into Salesforce, and then a ton of confidence about what we're pulling out and what we're doing with that. And then better decision making, and I sort of touched on this, but we're in a situation now where the reports that are going to the decision makers contain the data from Salesforce, from BigQuery. They reflect the exact same numbers we're putting in Salesforce, and they're up to date, and there's no magic, and there's no manual spreadsheets doing it. It's all just happening in an aligned and accurate way. So that's really a big win for a larger company like us, where you might have many different teams using different data sources. We've got everything in one place. There's no ambiguity. So just for closing thoughts, the composable data platform wins. This is this sort of cyclical design, DBT, Hightouch, replication cycle. This is a repeatable strategy that we can use in many different places, which we intend to. This approach has solved us problems that the older piecemeal solutions just simply couldn't touch. So what began as a very specific challenge with Salesforce has helped us to kind of understand and step back about how we do data integrations on my team, and it's changed how we approach and think about these things moving forward. So final thoughts. Everybody wins. Our stakeholders are thrilled. You don't normally get that, so I'm thrilled that they're thrilled. The creative partnership team's workflows have been transformed, literally and figuratively. With better data at their fingertips, their impact is felt across the org in a much more real and fast way. Data owners are happy, which, let's face us, that's all of us, right? We like to be happy once in a while, so that's been lovely. But more concretely, forgot my big finish. More concretely, we have a system that's simple to maintain, minimal tech debt, and freedom from those clunky Salesforce-esque outdated tech stacks. So this is not just good data management, it's, to me, organizational agility, giving the teams at Spotify they need to be successful and do their best work. So just a quick round of acknowledgements. Big Time Data is a group we worked with super close to get this to work on the Salesforce side. They're not here this week, but they're great. I can't say enough good things about them, so please do check them out. And then huge thanks to Hightouch. They're very early partners with us on that, and no matter how many problems, seemingly impossible problems I gave them, they said, no, that's fine, no, that's fine, we can do that. And of course, thanks to everybody at Spotify, who I thought maybe they'd be watching live, but we're not doing that this year. So thank you when you hear the recording, everybody, for providing feedback and the technical support to get this working. So that's what I have for you today. I think we have just a little bit of time. Let me know if there's any questions. Who's first? You want to start over here?
What kind of engineering do you need on the Salesforce side to make the whole thing work?
So the question is, what kind of engineering do we need on the Salesforce side to make this all work? Again, I'm the farthest thing from a Salesforce expert, so I apologize to everybody in this room who came here because they thought they'd learn something about Salesforce. I'm not that person. But that's why this project has worked, because we're able to keep things modular and make it all go together. So the answer is nothing. Salesforce just has its native objects, and Hightouch gives us the ability just to write in. So it's just a matter of hooking up how the data is displayed in Salesforce. But as a counter, the original implementation that we kind of got from this first set of consultants, they were using a bunch of internal Salesforce mechanisms to try to pull the data in. And we just could not get that to work at the volume we needed, but also in a way that like we found to be like secure. There was no, they just needed way too much access to more than what we were willing to provide from our GCP project. So that was a no-go. But also, like, we couldn't do upserts. We had to push 100,000 records in every day, which Salesforce wasn't going to take. So Hightouch gave us a way to only dynamically update where we needed it, and that was like a big piece that unlocked a lot of this for us. So as little as possible in Salesforce keeps everybody happy, I think. Anybody else?
Roughly how many objects are you dynamically pulling in?
So the question was how many objects? It's a good question. Salesforce just by default creates like hundreds of these like behind the scenes objects, and you really don't need a lot of them. Fortunately, Big Time Data basically said, here's the list of 20, essentially, that you need. So just do that. And we've just taken it at that and done that. We've iterated in a few places on the reporting layer. And they've said, oh, well, actually, we need a few more objects, which is fine. We've set up the code just to pull what we need. So getting the data back out of Salesforce is really quite simple if you're willing to just snapshot replicate it, just copy it wholesale, and then we use dbt on top on our side then to join it up and turn it into something that's a little bit more like table-like, de-relationalize it, I guess. Do you want to take that one? Does Hightouch do the write-backs to the warehouse?
Yeah, no, so I think Spotify's using Flight, right, to copy from Salesforce into BigQuery. So no, we're not taking anything from Salesforce into BigQuery. We're only going BigQuery into Salesforce.
There was a piece on this slide where you were also, after you had enriched the Salesforce data, you were writing it back to the warehouse. Is that something custom?
Yeah, so Hightouch specializes in pushing data, but not pulling out. And no matter how many times I asked them nicely, they said, no, we don't do that. We looked at a few different vendors, like Fivetran is like a big one in this space. I think we all know them. But given what we needed was just a daily snapshot, we opted just to spin up a bit of custom Python code. We just have it running on a schedule. Really, really super simple stuff. Just replicate it into GCS, and we're basically doing external tables into BigQuery. So, pre-iceberg style thing. And then again, dbt sits on top of it and then materializes it into, out of that like inscrutable Salesforce form and into more like analyst-friendly tables, that's what gets exposed to the end users. So, yeah, it's really trying to figure out the API for putting data into Salesforce, that was a nope. I noped right away. But to copy it back out, okay, we could handle this. That's simple enough. Sure.
I understand that you have this kind of loop with data going around, which introduces latencies usually.
Yep.
Have you experienced any issues with, for example, someone doing an update in Salesforce and then you have a report that tells something?
Yep. Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think that's coming from somebody who's probably faced a similar situation, so I appreciate that. We've, number one has just been like stakeholder management and communication around that. We've just essentially said, we've outlined to them when the different stages refresh so that they know like the SLOs, essentially. We've worked back and forth with them, and we've sort of set up a set that are like pretty generous to us and not difficult for them. And so we just like kind of agree that it's okay, that there is a data lag. But in terms of like inaccuracies, because it's a DAG, because it's single directional, there's no way for like a feedback loop to interrupt or to like cause issues. So that means we're always like kind of like snapshotting the data as we go. So we haven't really encountered any issues of like bad data because of the cyclical design. But I think that's certainly a concern depending on how you set up your routing in dbt and exactly what metrics you need for what stages. Maybe one more.
Do you do any exploration around having embedded dashboards or anything where you pass your, say, customer ID to the dashboard, or
Yeah, so the question was essentially embedded dashboards into Salesforce. There were like two approaches to this, and originally, like, I'm a very ambitious data science background. We can do anything, plot the data, you know, I love time series, how hard could it be? But we, very quickly were able to assess that, like, there's no way that we can do what we need to do to, like, build plots in Salesforce based on, like, the size of the instance that we had available to us. So, like, live figures embedded in Salesforce was like a no. There is some stuff you can do about, like, embedding dashboards, but in the end, like, big time data kind of advised, like, us that they hadn't really ever found a solution that, like, works really well for that. The next best thing, which we do, and I don't have this in the talk, is we've set up a Tableau dashboard that accepts input parameters. So, you know, you click on the link and it'll take you directly to, you know, a pre-rendered view with, like, the filters already set. We pre-render those URLs, we push them into Salesforce with Hightouch, of course. And so those are available to the users. Like, it'll show up in the record, like, hey, click this link if you want to see this view in Tableau. But they're still, like, they just don't even want to open Tableau. So just getting, at the end of the day, they're like, we just need, like, a laundry list of, like, metrics. And that's been, like, good enough for them. But yeah, I think it's, you know, there's sort of the philosophical debate, is Salesforce a BI tool? And I think, you know, most people would argue, like, probably not, but then also, like, you know, the user's always right, so what's the right answer, you know? Okay, I'm happy to close it there. We'll be around for a bit, so, you know, come up and say hi if you want, but I can't fix your shuffle, so please don't ask me about that. Thanks everybody for coming.